The rain had stopped, but the city still smelled like wet asphalt and fried plantains from the corner cafe. James Carter sat on the edge of his worn-out sofa, a cup of lukewarm coffee trembling slightly in his hands. The apartment was quiet, unnervingly quiet, except for the occasional car horn echoing from the street below. He stared at the door, imagining it swinging open, imagining her footsteps returning, but she never did. She hadn't come back, not once, and not that evening, not ever. Her words from hours ago, was it days, still echoed in his head. I can't do this anymore, James. I can't watch us circle in the same fight, the same silence. Maybe this is best. Best. That word tasted bitter on his tongue, a word dressed as relief, but leaving nothing but a hollow ache. For years he had bent over backward, given everything without hesitation, begged for smiles, begged for forgiveness, begged for patience, begged for love he thought he deserved. And now? Silence. Cold, unyielding, suffocating silence. Flashbacks assaulted him in fragments, sharp and relentless. There was her laughter in the kitchen as he struggled with a burnt omelet. There was the night she cried into his shoulder about the pressure from her family. The promises he had made, always steady, always patient, always there. He had trusted loyalty as the ultimate currency of love. But she had left like the city outside had never known him. Like every gesture, every midnight call, every apology he had whispered into the darkness was invisible. Asterisk, he remembered his friend's warnings. Half-jokes veiled as wisdom. Some women take James. They don't stay for the build. They stay for the thrill. He had scoffed at them, insisting he loved differently. He gave he didn't expect return, or so he told himself. And now the truth, sharp as broken glass, lay bare. Giving blindly is only a strength if the other heart matches the rhythm. Otherwise, it's a slow, quiet erosion. Hours passed. He didn't move. The rain stopped completely, leaving the city in a strange post-storm calm, and he felt like he was suspended in time. Then the phone buzzed. He didn't check it immediately. A part of him, stubborn and hopeful, feared what the screen might show. Another part, a part that had been learning patience the hard way, already knew. The message was from her. I hope you're okay. I just think we need space. I'm sorry. No explanations, no apologies. Just words packed with polite finality. He didn't respond. He deleted it. Then he sat even longer, feeling the weight of all those unreciprocated moments. Settled like dust in the corners of the apartment, James finally rose and walked to the window. The city sprawled endlessly, a tapestry of buildings, streets, and life that didn't pause for anyone's heartbreak. He realized that for years he had defined himself by her perception, by her approval, by her love. Every compliment he craved, every argument he tried to resolve, every apology he offered, it had been a performance for her audience. And now, with the audience gone, he was left with himself. Raw and exposed. Something shifted inside him then, subtle but undeniable. Not anger. Not desperation. Something quieter. Something stronger. He refused to beg anymore. Refused to explain his worth. Refused to chase someone who had already made her decision. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't coldness. It was reclamation. For the first time in months, he felt the tiny spark of self-respect flicker to life. He wouldn't let her absence define him. That night, James didn't sleep, not immediately. He cooked a simple dinner, steak and fried plantains, and ate slowly, savoring each bite as if the act of nourishing himself was a rebellion against the hollow nights. He thought about what it had meant to give endlessly, to bend himself into someone else's expectations. He realized giving was never the problem, it was giving when the other person wasn't willing to meet you halfway. That was what broke him before, and it would not break him again. Outside, the city moved, indifferent and relentless. James stepped onto the balcony, leaning against the railing, watching the distant lights flicker and pulse. Somewhere, someone else was living, laughing, taking life for granted. He had lost her, yes, but he had not lost himself. And in that realization, he found a strange, unsteady peace. Tomorrow, he would step into the world differently. Not angry, not bitter, but grounded, ready, for he had learned the first truth of freedom. Stopping the begging is not the end, it is the beginning. Asterisk, the morning sunlight poured through the blinds, sharp and relentless, slicing across the floor of James's apartment. He sat at the small kitchen table, untouched coffee steaming beside a plate of scrambled eggs, his mind replaying the night before. For the first time in years, he hadn't begged. He hadn't called, texted, or tried to convince her that he was worth staying for. He hadn't flinched at the thought of rejection. That small, quiet act of refusal felt monumental. He remembered the countless nights he had bent under the weight of expectation, for words that were never meant to hurt, sacrificing his own comfort for someone who barely noticed, and yet in that surrender he had lost himself. The realization hit him now with an intensity he hadn't anticipated. All those months of pleading, of giving, of waiting, had taught him what mattered most. Self-respect is earned, not borrowed from another's affection. James's phone buzzed incessantly that morning. Calls, messages, notifications, all from familiar faces trying to check on him, including her. He ignored them. Each ignored call felt like a brick lifted from his chest. He didn't need to explain. He didn't need permission to exist without chasing approval. He had discovered a truth older than heartbreak. A man who stops begging reclaims his power. The shift wasn't immediate, but it was noticeable. At work, he carried himself differently. He spoke with more clarity, made decisions without hesitation, and didn't wait for validation. Coworkers noticed. Some were wary, others intrigued. People who had underestimated him now leaned in to listen. It was as if every hour he spent waiting for her had been a rehearsal for this moment of unshakable presence. Flashback hit again. Her laughter in the office lobby, the teasing she used to offer him, the countless times he had compromised on weekends to appease her whims. All those memories had once anchored him to dependency. Now they were tools for reflection, evidence that love had boundaries, and that crossing them repeatedly invites loss. James's reflection in the window caught his eye. He looked different, sharper, steadier, less haunted. There was a clarity in his posture that hadn't existed before. His chest rose taller, his gaze more deliberate. He realized that his heartbreak had been both a curse and a teacher, and he now intended to heed its lessons fully. By the afternoon, a small group of friends came by. They were hesitant at first, aware of the tension that had dominated James's life for months. But as he spoke, unflinching, about boundaries, dignity, and the lessons of letting go, they listened. They nodded. One friend, who had also been caught in a cycle of begging and disappointment, whispered, "I never realized. You just stop, and everything changes." James didn't need to answer. The quiet pride in his demeanor said it all. Later that evening, James walked through the city streets, the sun hanging low, bathing everything in amber light. Vendors called out. Street children laughed. The urban hum pulsed with life indifferent to his personal transformation. He passed a couple arguing in the marketplace, a man begging for attention, a woman walking away without a backward glance. He felt a connection to that scene, not of pain, but of understanding. He had once been the man begging. Now, he observed it with empathy, not desperation. That night, alone in his apartment, James wrote in his journal for the first time in months. He documented the moments of heartbreak, the waves of longing, and the subtle victories of two-day moments where he had resisted the urge to call, to explain, to chase. The act of writing crystallized his growth. By putting words to his experience, he solidified the boundaries he had begun to enforce. Sleep came later, heavy but restorative, and in his dreams he walked through corridors filled with shadows of his past, his own voice begging, her face dismissing. But this time he walked confidently, stepping past every shadow, refusing to stumble. The man who once knelt for love now stood tall. And the difference was not just physical, it was elemental. A shift of spirit as the city hummed outside, lights flickering in the distance. James realized the first profound truth of his journey. Stopping the begging doesn't mean stopping love. It means loving oneself enough to walk with dignity, to demand respect, and to allow life to unfold on its own terms. Tomorrow, he would carry this forward into every conversation, every choice, every step. And in that quiet evening, a subtle anticipation stirred. Life had more lessons, more tests, and more moments where his resolve would be challenged. But James Carter now understood something essential. What happens when a man finally stops begging is not an end. It's the opening of a new chapter. Asterisk. The next morning, the city greeted James with its usual chaos. Honking taxis, street vendors shouting over each other, the hum of life indifferent to personal battles. He stepped out of his apartment with a lightness he hadn't felt in years, shoulders squared, spine straight. For the first time, he wasn't moving through the city trying to measure how others perceived him. He was simply present at work. The effects of his newfound resolve were immediate. Meetings that once felt like minefields now became arenas where he operated confidently. Colleagues who had subtly undermined him were surprised by the calm authority in his voice. He spoke with clarity, his words measured, his gestures deliberate. The change wasn't loud or flashy, but it was undeniable. Pio planatis. Respect was no longer something he begged for. It was something he naturally commanded. Meanwhile, at home, the reverberations of his decision became more personal. His partner, Maya, sensed the shift immediately. Where she once held the power to provoke, to frustrate, to bend him to her whims, she now met a wall of quiet strength. She called, texted, even showed up unexpectedly one evening, hoping to draw him back into old patterns. But James met her not with anger, not with pleading, not with explanations, just steady, calm resistance. "You've changed," she said one night, leaning against the doorway, arms crossed. Her voice carried a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. "I don't understand why you don't chase me anymore." James looked at her, eyes steady, unwavering. "Because I stopped begging," he said simply, "and for the first time, I respect myself enough not to do it anymore." Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed. Silence filled the space between them. Maya realized that the man she had taken for granted was no longer available for her. Manipulation. That realization unsettled her more than anything he could have said. The shift in dynamics extended beyond the two of them. James's friends noticed it too. Those who had watched him bend, crumble, and apologize repeatedly were now witnesses to his quiet metamorphosis. Some cheered silently. Others were skeptical. One friend, David, who had a habit of giving his all in relationships while receiving little in return, asked one afternoon, "Man, how did you stop caring?" James shook his head with a small smile. "It's not about not caring. It's about valuing yourself enough to stop begging for what should be mutual." The lesson landed with weight. For those who had seen his pain, his growth was both a warning and an inspiration. The consequences, however, weren't all external. James wrestled internally with guilt and doubt. Every instinct in his body, honed over years of compromise and submission, urged him to pick up the phone, send a text, to try just once more to bridge the chasm. But he resisted. He reminded himself that real strength is quiet. It's not performative. Each refusal to chase reaffirmed his dignity. Evenings became his sanctuary. He cooked simple meals, grilled fish, jollof rice, sautéed vegetables, and ate while listening to soft jazz. Sometimes he'd write in his journal, chronicling the quiet victories of not pleading, not explaining, not compromising his essence. These mundane acts, previously overlooked, became acts of reclaiming his life. Each meal, each note, each silent breath was a brick in the foundation of the man he was becoming. One day, walking through the bustling streets of Lagos, James passed a couple arguing near a street stall. The man was shouting, pleading, his voice hoarse with desperation. The woman walked away without glancing back. James stopped for a moment, watching, and felt neither pity nor anger, only clarity. He remembered that man. He had once been him, but he was no longer. He understood now that begging, when met with indifference, only strengthens someone else's control over you. By the end of the week, subtle victories accumulated. At work, he secured a promotion because he no longer deferred to others for approval. In his personal life, friends and family treated him differently. Recognizing a quiet confidence that had been absent for years, even Maya began to see a man she could no longer control. The consequences of stopping the begging rippled through every corner of his life, sometimes causing tension, sometimes inspiring admiration. That night, as he stepped onto his balcony and looked out at the city glittering beneath the twilight, James understood a profound truth. The moment a man stops begging, he doesn't just regain his power, he reshapes his entire world. And the world, for the first time, responded to the man he had always been capable of becoming. Asterisk. The city's morning air carried the scent of roasted maize and fresh bread as James walked briskly through the bustling streets of Lagos. The sun glinted off the high-rise buildings, reflecting the new clarity he felt within himself. Each step seemed lighter, more purposeful. For the first time, he was moving through the world not as a man seeking approval, but as a man who had reclaimed it for himself. Work had become a stage for quiet authority. Meetings that once left him anxious and pleading now became opportunities to assert insight and intelligence without fear. Colleagues who had overlooked him for promotions or dismissed his ideas now paused to listen. And while some still whispered doubts behind his back, their skepticism no longer rattled him. Confidence, he realized, wasn't loud or performative. It was steady, unwavering, and visible in every deliberate gesture. Yet the real test came outside the office. Maya, sensing the shift, began testing boundaries. She appeared at his apartment unannounced, feigning casual concern. "James, I just thought we could talk," she said, leaning against the doorway with a forced smile. She tried the old tactic pleading, subtle guilt trips. Reminders of shared history, but he didn't react the way he once would have. He listened, nodded, and maintained calm. His silence spoke louder than any words he could have offered. Later that evening, his younger sister Tasha came over. She'd always been protective, sometimes overly so, and she'd noticed the tension. "James, are you sure you're doing the right thing? You're shutting her out completely." He shook his head, smiling softly. "I'm not shutting anyone out. I'm just choosing not to chase what doesn't value me. There's a difference." Tasha paused, sensing the sincerity in his words. "I've never seen you like this. Steady, strong. It suits you." That steadiness became a magnet for others. Friends, colleagues, even casual acquaintances began to respond differently to James, where he had once deferred or begged for inclusion. He now engaged on equal footing. The subtle power shift was almost tangible, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond personal relationships. Yet with this newfound strength came moments of doubt. At night, when the city hummed with distant traffic and the occasional wail of a siren, James sometimes felt the pangs of loneliness. He thought of Maya and the life they might have had, the moments he had cherished. But each pang was tempered by a quiet mantra he repeated to himself: "Respect yourself enough to stop begging, and the world will adjust accordingly." He began investing in himself more consciously. Early mornings were reserved for jogging through the streets, feeling the pulse of the city beneath his feet, letting the rhythm clear his mind. Afternoons were for learning, reading business books, attending workshops, honing skills that would fortify both his career and his sense of self. Evenings were for reflection, journaling the victories of his restraint, the emotional wins of the day. James also began testing his boundaries in social situations. Where he once acquiesced to unnecessary demands or requests that didn't align with his values, he now politely refused. At first, there was discomfort. Friends used to taking advantage of his generosity pushed back, but over time, they adapted, learning to respect the new version of James. One evening, at a small dinner gathering, Maya appeared again. Observing him from across the room, she noticed the difference immediately: the confidence in his posture, the way people gravitated toward him, the subtle, unspoken authority he now commanded. For the first time, she realized she no longer held control over his emotions or actions. That revelation unsettled her in ways she hadn't anticipated. James smiled inwardly. This was the test he had feared the most. maintaining his calm, integrity, and boundaries when provoked by familiar temptation. And he passed, not with dramatics or confrontation, but with quiet dignity. It was a lesson in power. True strength is rarely shouted. It is quietly lived. By the week's end, James felt the cumulative effect of these choices. Life had become less about pleading, more about presence. Less about desperation, more about deliberate action. The man who had once chased love, approval, and validation now moved through the world like a man who understood his worth and refused to compromise it. That night, he sat on his balcony, city lights flickering below like distant stars. He allowed himself a rare smile, a small acknowledgement of how far he had come. The journey wasn't complete, but the path was clear. Stopping the begging had not only preserved his dignity, had opened a door to opportunities, respect, and self-discovery he had never imagined possible. The following week carried a new rhythm. Lagos pulsed with energy, the scent of roasted corn, the hum of motorcycles, the chatter of market sellers, but James no longer felt like a passive participant. He moved deliberately through the streets, absorbing the city with awareness rather than anxiety. Every interaction, every glance, every casual conversation was no longer filtered through the lens of approval-seeking. He was present, grounded, and most importantly, unapologetically himself. Work reflected this change immediately. A project that had once seemed insurmountable was now within his control. He proposed a new marketing strategy for his company's urban retail expansion, not as a plea for recognition, but as a confident recommendation backed by research and insight. Colleagues who had once discounted his ideas nodded in appreciation. Even skeptical managers who had tolerated his previous hesitations now began to view him as an indispensable voice. He realized that strength was magnetic. When he stopped pleading, opportunities gravitated toward him naturally. Outside the office, life mirrored his professional transformation. Friends began seeking his company, inspired by his calm authority and subtle confidence. Tasha, his younger sister, remarked one evening during a casual dinner, "James, it's like you've always been here, but somehow stronger. People notice." He smiled, acknowledging her words without arrogance. Understanding that true transformation rarely needs validation, it radiates quietly. Maya, however, remained a constant, silent test. She noticed the shift, of course. Subtle attempts to re-engage through calls, messages, and even chance encounters on the street met with polite, composed refusal. One evening, she cornered him near a cafe, feigning concern. "James, I just think we should talk," she said, eyes searching. James met her gaze steadily. "We can talk," he replied evenly. "But I'm not here to beg, and I won't negotiate my dignity for anyone." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had once believed that emotional manipulation could draw him back into old patterns, but now his refusal was absolute. That refusal wasn't anger. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity, self-respect, and calm determination. For the first time, she realized she no longer held the power she once took for granted. With Maya's departure, James turned his attention to other aspects of his life that had been neglected. He reconnected with his community, volunteering at a local youth center to teach entrepreneurship skills. The act of giving now came from a place of choice, not desperation, and the impact was immediate. Children listened with rapt attention. Teenagers asked questions about confidence, boundaries, and resilience. James found fulfillment in teaching lessons he had learned the hard way: the value of self-respect, courage to say no, and the power that comes from refusing to beg. Even his leisure time shifted. Instead of evenings consumed by longing or overthinking, he explored hobbies and interests that had lain dormant. Cooking became a meditation. He experimented with spicy jollof rice, grilled fish, and peppered plantains, savoring each meal as an act of self-care. He joined a local basketball league, not for competition, but for the joy of movement, teamwork, and camaraderie. Each small choice reinforced the larger lesson. His life was no longer dictated by the approval or presence of others. The week culminated in a rooftop party overlooking the city. Friends gathered, music drifting through the warm evening air. James observed, quietly but intentionally, the interactions around him. Couples flirted, colleagues mingled, laughter floated across the rooftop. And yet, he felt a sense of peace, unshaken by comparison or longing. He was here fully himself, fully present. The world had adjusted accordingly. As night settled over Lagos, James stepped onto the balcony alone. The city lights shimmered, reflections dancing in puddles from an earlier drizzle. For the first time in years, he felt unburdened by expectation, unshaken by rejection, untouched by the need to chase affection. He realized that personal growth was not a destination, but a continuous practice, a series of choices made each day to honor one's dignity. And in that quiet moment, a subtle truth crystallized in his mind. Stopping the begging was not about losing love, it was about discovering a deeper, more enduring form of it. The love he now cultivated for himself was stronger, unwavering, unapologetically powerful. The following week arrived with a mix of routine and tension. James had settled into a rhythm of calm confidence, but life has a way of testing the strength of new foundations. Maya's attempts to reassert influence had grown more deliberate. She appeared at his office lobby one rainy afternoon, her hair damp, eyes glinting with an intensity he hadn't seen in months. "James," she began, voice soft but commanding, I need to understand why you've changed, why you refuse to fight for us anymore." James met her gaze evenly. "I'm not refusing to fight. I'm refusing to beg." Her brows furrowed, confusion and frustration warring on her face. "Beg? You've always been willing to fight for me." "I fought," he said calmly, "and I gave. But you didn't meet me halfway, and that's not my failure, it's ours. I will not chase what's unwilling to stay." Maya's eyes narrowed, and she left without another word, but the test had only just begun. The real challenge wasn't her, it was the world, the city, the subtle forces that measured him by old standards. That night, James received a call from his boss, asking him to work late on a project he didn't feel prepared for. It was a high-stakes assignment, one that could either advance his career or expose him to criticism. In the past, James might have accepted immediately, out of fear of disappointing or appearing incapable. But now he paused, considered, and chose his response carefully. "I'll take the assignment," he said, "but I need tomorrow morning to prepare fully. I want to deliver the best result, not just the quickest." His boss hesitated, then agreed. That subtle act of asserting boundaries, of prioritizing his readiness over blind compliance, was another test he passed. He realized that stopping the begging wasn't just about relationships, it was about how he engaged with the world in every sphere. The next evening, Maya appeared again, this time at a social gathering with mutual friends. She tried to draw attention to herself, to provoke jealousy, to manipulate the dynamics he had once catered to. James noticed, quietly, watching her attempt to destabilize him. But he didn't react. He didn't look at her. He didn't chase. He simply engaged with friends, laughed freely, and navigated conversations with ease. The room's energy subtly shifted. Friends who had once relied on him for approval now respected the calm, grounded presence he exuded. Even his younger sister Tasha noticed the difference. She pulled him aside later that night. "James, I've never seen you like this. You're untouchable, somehow. Maya can't manipulate you. Your friends respect you, and even strangers seem to notice your presence." James smiled, but inwardly he knew the truth. Untouchable wasn't the right word. It wasn't about power over others. It was about mastery over oneself. Every test, every challenge, every attempt to draw him into desperation or apology had been met with discipline, patience, and quiet dignity. That was strength. That was freedom. The final trial came unexpectedly. A former friend, someone James had helped countless times in the past, tried to exploit his generosity. They asked for a loan, an expensive favor, and used guilt as leverage. In another life, James might have acquiesced, bending to expectations once again. But now he paused. He explained firmly, kindly, without fear, "I've learned that my resources, my energy, and my time are valuable. I can help, but not at the expense of my own stability." The friend left, frustrated and surprised. James didn't flinch. He felt neither guilt nor remorse, clarity. The lesson was consistent. Stopping the begging creates boundaries that demand respect, not because he forced it, but because he exemplifies it. That night, he stood on the balcony, city lights shimmering like a sea of gold. He reflected on the week, Maya's tests, his boss's challenges, friends' expectations. Each moment had been a trial, a push to see if the old patterns would pull him back. They didn't. He had passed every test, not with anger, not with resistance, but with deliberate, composed presence. And in that realization, a quiet, profound victory emerged. Stopping the begging wasn't a single act. It was a continuous choice. A choice to honor his worth, his dignity, and his life. And now, after every test, he understood what it truly meant. A man who stops begging gains more than freedom. He gains mastery over himself, over his life, and over the world he once allowed to control him. The weekend arrived like a slow drumbeat, the city humming with life as Lagosians moved through markets, streets, and cafes. James had learned to savor these ordinary rhythms, finding quiet strength in the mundane. But today, the world had another test waiting. Maya appeared unexpectedly at a mutual friend's rooftop party, her presence deliberate, a test she couldn't resist administering. She carried herself with a mixture of confidence and subtle defiance, eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on James. For months, she had held sway over his emotions, and now she tried again, hoping to provoke the familiar desperation, the instinct to beg, to chase, to justify himself. But James didn't flinch. He had rehearsed this moment in every silent evening, in every reflection, in every journal entry. The man she had known, the man who once apologized for every slight, who sought approval with every heartbeat, was gone. Standing there among friends, under the glow of the city lights, he radiated a calm authority that neither threatened nor intimidated. It simply existed. Maya approached, tempting charm and subtle guilt. "James, I just want to understand why you won't chase me anymore," she said. Voice soft but edged with tension. James met her gaze steadily. "Because I stopped begging," he said, words measured, unwavering. "I've realized that love, respect, and dignity are earned mutually. If they aren't given freely, they aren't truly worth having." For a moment, silence enveloped them, punctuated only by the distant sound of the city and laughter from friends nearby. Maya's face shifted, confusion, frustration, and a flicker of respect passing in quick succession. She realized that the game she once controlled had ended. James wasn't reacting emotionally. He wasn't pleading. He was simply himself, complete, untouchable in the quietest sense of the word. That evening wasn't just about Maya. It was about James's relationships with the world at large. Friends approached him with genuine admiration. Colleagues sought his insight. And even strangers noticed the subtle transformation in the way he carried himself. Opportunities that had once required desperate pleading now arrived without effort. Invitations, responsibilities, and recognition flowed naturally toward him. The city, indifferent yet attentive, mirrored the shift within. James's sister, Tasha, pulled him aside as they watched the sunset from the rooftop. "You've changed everything," she said softly. "People can feel it. You can feel it. You're free." James nodded. He understood freedom wasn't the absence of challenge, nor was it the lack of responsibility. Freedom was knowing that he no longer had to bend, plead, or compromise his dignity for the acceptance of others. It was walking through life with clear boundaries, self-respect, and unwavering confidence. That night, back in his apartment, James reflected on the journey. He remembered the nights spent in solitude, the relentless cycle of pleading, the heartbreak, and the small victories of resisting the urge to chase. Every choice he had made to stop begging had compounded, each one building the foundation for this moment of clarity and power. He realized that the transformation was both internal and external. He was respected, observed, and even admired. But most importantly, he respected and admired himself. A quiet smile crossed his face as he prepared a simple meal: grilled fish, steamed vegetables, and jollof rice. The act of feeding himself, nourishing his own body without the weight of expectation, felt symbolic of everything he had learned. Giving without desperation, loving without begging, standing without apology. This was the essence of his newfound life. As the city lights flickered outside, James thought about the road ahead. Challenges would come, as they always do. Temptation, heartbreak, manipulation, and doubt would appear in various forms. But he had learned the ultimate lesson: stopping the begging doesn't end life's tests. It changes the way you respond to them. And responding from a place of dignity, strength, and self-respect transformed every encounter into a choice rather than a trap. He looked out over Lagos one final time that night, heart steady, mind clear. The city pulsed beneath him, alive with opportunity, laughter, and struggle. And James Carter, the man who had once knelt for love and approval, now stood tall, grounded, and free. The transformation was complete, and with it came a quiet, unwavering truth. What happens when a man finally stops begging is not emptiness or loss, it is liberation, respect, and the reclamation of his own life. Asterisk, the city had settled into its nighttime rhythm, the streets glowing with the golden warmth of streetlights and neon signs, reflecting in the puddles left by a sudden evening drizzle. James Carter stood on his balcony, the cool breeze brushing against his face, carrying the faint scent of roasted plantains and distant traffic. The hum of Lagos was constant, but tonight it felt different, less chaotic, less urgent. For the first time in years, he felt completely aligned with himself. He reflected on the journey, the years of giving, the nights spent pleading for attention and affection, the countless sacrifices that went unnoticed or unappreciated. He remembered Maya's laughter, the arguments, the moments of intimacy and betrayal, and the slow erosion of his self-worth as he chased her approval. Each memory had once been a weight on his chest, a reminder of his failures. But now, those same memories felt like lessons carved into the foundation of his being. He thought of the week that had just passed the tests, the challenges, the subtle pressures from the city, his work, and his social circles. He had resisted every manipulation, every plea, every expectation that threatened to pull him back into the cycle of begging. And in doing so, he discovered a profound truth. Strength is not measured by how much you give, but by how you maintain your dignity in the face of desire, loss, and pressure. Maya's absence, once a source of relentless pain, had become a mirror reflecting his growth. She had tested him repeatedly, hoping to provoke desperation, to remind him of the man who once bent, who once chased, who once apologized endlessly. But James had stood firm. Each refusal to chase, each assertion of boundaries, had not only preserved his self-respect, but amplified his presence. People noticed. Friends, colleagues, even strangers responded differently to a man who had finally learned to walk. Upright without seeking approval, he smiled faintly, recalling the small victories, the look of surprise on his boss's face when he negotiated deadlines with calm authority, the admiration in his sister Tasha's eyes, the gratitude of the youth he had mentored, learning lessons about self-worth and resilience. These moments were more than validation. They were evidence that the world responds to integrity and confidence. When you stop begging, life begins to recognize your value. James walked to the kitchen and prepared a simple meal, savoring each bite as an act of self-care. Cooking, once a mundane necessity, had become a ritual of empowerment, a reminder that nurturing oneself is as important as any relationship or career success. He thought of his friends and colleagues, of the countless moments where he had given endlessly without reciprocity. Now, he gave when it mattered, without fear or desperation, guided by choice rather than compulsion. The phone buzzed once, a message from Maya. "Can we talk? I miss how things were." James paused, reading the words carefully. For a fleeting second, old instincts whispered for him to respond, to chase, to beg for reconciliation. But he closed the phone with deliberate calm. He didn't need to respond. He understood now that true connection is earned, not demanded. Respect, love, and trust cannot be conjured by pleading. They can only grow when both hearts meet on equal footing. James returned to the balcony, looking over Lagos with a sense of serene triumph. The city, vibrant and unpredictable, mirrored the lessons of his journey. Life would always present challenges, moments of temptation, heartbreak, and uncertainty. But the man who had once knelt for love now stood firm, guided by self-respect, clarity, and a newfound understanding of personal boundaries. He reflected on the ultimate lesson. Stopping the begging is not the absence of love, is the beginning of true empowerment. It is the reclamation of your life, the recognition of your worth, and the freedom to engage with the world as a complete, dignified human being. In the quiet glow of the city lights, James Carter smiled. He had stopped chasing. He had stopped pleading. And in that cessation, he had discovered the fullness of his own strength. The man who had once been defined by others' acceptance was now defined by his own, its unwavering integrity. And as the night deepened, Lagos continued to breathe around him, alive with stories, struggles, and opportunities. James understood, at last, that life rewards those who honor themselves, who refuse to beg, and who walk forward with dignity, courage, and unwavering self-respect. The journey was complete, yet it had just begun. Because a man who stops begging doesn't just survive, he thrives, he commands, and he finally lives on his own terms.